That blast was not a backfire. 2 minutes later, scout cars speed by, lights flashing, sirens blaring. Folk in this neighborhood seem immune to such sounds. Sirens, aftershocks, mean something different here. Mothers still check for their young children, but otherwise, rhythms go unaltered, unaffected. Children can't be but so protected on these streets. So when you hear backfires or gunshots, you cast a glance over your shoulder, over your children, but you don't miss a beat. You don't ask questions. You sure don't answer any, lest the street catch your name next time.
License and registration, he can sense your aggravation.
On the head of the fallen angel.
When the world is muttering under the floorboards, stomp even louder.
Time.
Let them know you are alive today.
Or unhum.
Did you know that your hands came with a ripple effect?
Whisper tones unraveling like silk.
Blood, sweat, and tears win by any means poetry.
Sway, look at me. Is a piece of the pie too good for me?
Some may call it rock the mic. We call it poetry.
Well, hello. Welcome to Sojourn with Words. I'm your host, Sistah Joy, and once again, we are here sharing and discussing poetry. Now, certainly, like all episodes on Sojourn with Words, you can expect the very best in poetry and in poets. And today is absolutely no exception. I'm honored to present our guest poet today, Anne Bracken. Let me share a little bit about Anne before I invite her on mic. Anne, first of all, welcome to Sojourn with Words. And again, to our guest, Anne Bracken has authored 3 poetry collections: Once You're Inside, Poems Exploring Incarceration, No Barking in the Hallways, Poems from the Classroom, and The Altar of Innocence. Now, Anne serves as a contributing editor for Little Patuxent Review and also co-facilitates the Wild Reading Poetry series. Her poetry, essays, and interviews have appeared in numerous anthologies and journals. Anne's poetry has garnered not 1, but 2 Pushcart Prize nominations. She's been featured in Best American Poetry and has been interviewed by Maryland State Poet Laureate Grace Cavallari on The Poet and the Poem, which is produced out of the Library of Congress. Now, Anne's advocacy work promotes using the arts to foster paradigm change in the areas of emotional wellness, education, and prison abolition. And you've got some heavy topics here in your poetry, but because I've heard you before, it's not so very daunting when we hear your messages because they are so just personal. You take very substantive, challenging topics, but you break it down and make it such that our hearts immediately connect with your messages. Tell me, well, how was it? Because you did go into the prison system and work with the incarcerated. Tell us, first of all, what brought you to that? And we're jumping right in. For those that are new to Anne, you're going to get a trial by fire lesson of immersion, because her material is so intense, but so beautifully written and so poignant. It's going to take you on a journey. And again, how did you come to decide to embark on this journey?
Well, as part of my work for the Little Patuxent Review, my editor asked me to go into going to Patuxent Institution in Jessup with a professor from the University of Maryland who was running a writing group. And she wanted me to interview the professor, which was no problem. I was happy to do that. And after I finished that interview, she said, and now I want you to go into the prison and interview the men, which I hadn't exactly counted on. But when I got all cleared, they told me you have 90 minutes. That's all you have. You can interview 5 men and you can't take any recording device. So I thought up 2 questions that I could ask each of them in order to have unity in the interview. And so I asked them, who were you when you came in and who are you now? So I really got their stories of the lives that they lived before they came to prison, how old they were. Most of them were young teenagers who made some kind of serious mistake. I never asked them what they did. But by the time I met them, they had spent half their lives in prison.
Okay, so I'm sure that had a powerful impact on you as a writer. Most of us writers have empathetic tendencies. So as far as the information, the knowledge, the experience, it's not something that just stays on the surface. That type of in-depth analysis is one that I'm sure would evoke writing opportunities for any poet of merit. Tell us, when you talk about the messages from your poetry, are you talking about the individuals? Are you talking about their circumstances, their conditions as incarcerated? What do you focus on most?
Well, I decided that I would try to give as full of a picture as possible about what it's like to be inside of a prison. So I guess you could say I changed my camera angle to suit the purposes of the poem. So some of them are written from my point of view as the teacher and as someone entering a very disturbing and profoundly ugly and dirty environment. And then some of them are written in the voices of the men that I worked with. I would often write as soon as I got home and write down what happened and what they said to me. Sometimes if my colleague was teaching, I would take notes while the teaching was going on. And part of the note taking was really to keep me grounded, because it was so disturbing hearing the things that the men shared with us about where they lived and the food they ate and the retribution with solitary confinement. It was kind of overwhelming. So the note taking kept me grounded in the moment.
Right. Now, I note that you speak of yourself in that setting as the teacher as opposed to as the poet. How does that duality impact your experience in that setting?
Well, I went in to work in a writing group, and I've been a writing teacher for many years. I've also taught teenage boys that had learning disabilities or emotional challenges. So I felt like a lot of these men were very similar to the boys that I had taught, but now they had 10 or more years added onto their lives and thus the maturity. So, it was kind of a dual role. I saw myself as encouraging their work in poetry and then also helping them to move to the next level, because they all wanted to grow as poets. So as part of that, I would bring in poems on different topics that they expressed interest in. And one of the biggest topics was history. So I found poems that dealt with American history. One of them that was most impactful was the Langston Hughes poem, Let America Be America for Me, which he wrote in 1935.
Right.
When he was traveling on trains across the country. But when you read that poem, which talks about immigrants and dispossessed people and homeless people, you wouldn't know that it was 1935.
Exactly. The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Right.
Now, when you talk about some of the experiences, what were some of the more surprising things that you discovered while working in a prison?
I guess I would say how awful the physical conditions were. Because as citizens, we hear so much about how much it costs to incarcerate a person. So you would think that the facilities might reflect some of that money, the classrooms, the food that the men are served, the things like that. But what I saw was leaking pipes and asbestos peeling off the pipes. I saw there was one leak that came through a wall that made a lake that was literally there for months. So you have the possibility of mold and bugs and just slipping in that mess of water. So it was a very dangerous environment. And then the classroom that they gave us to work in was basically abandoned. And it looked like it had been stripped and was ready for destruction.
Wow.
It's like, how do you expect people to learn and grow when you put them in an environment that says, we don't care about you?
Yeah, and that begs the question, do they really expect or want people to learn and grow? But then let's let me not interject my personal views. What surprised you most about the people that you actually met, the people themselves? What surprised you most?
That they weren't really frightening, that they were well read. It was very easy to have a conversation with them, and they were intellectually curious. They were actually very eager to learn. They're some of the most eager students I've ever worked with. But what surprised me was their spirits, and that they could maintain good humor and maintain their humanity in such awful conditions.
Well, Anne, are there some maybe one or two poems that you can share that relate to the things that surprised you most about the people that you met, and also the surprising things about working in prison? Are there some maybe from? Let's talk specifically about your newest book. Give us again the title and maybe one or two of the poems from that newest collection.
The collection is called Once You're Inside, Poems Exploring Incarceration. And the artwork was done by a formerly incarcerated woman from Utah. It's really a work of messaging, or, calling out to people on the outside that would like to learn about what prison is about, and maybe what we can do as citizens to change there's so many things around it. It's a multi-pronged problem. But one of the poems that I would like to read is called Maintenance. Maintenance. In a place where water can be a curse, puddles in the corner reek of chemicals and etch the tiles brown with stains. Plastic buckets in the hallway brim with gray water. Bugs float atop rafts of sodden drywall. Trays rigged to the ceiling with steel straps catch the steady trickle of water. For over 2 months, a leaking pipe creates a lake in the hallway. Cotton mop heads contain the fetid water. When I point out the dangers, one of the counselors tells me, those of us who work here have learned to walk around it. And this poem speaks to what is surprising about the people that you meet. This poem actually is a found poem from a letter that one of the men wrote to me when he was rearrested. It's called Letter from a Baltimore Jail. I face these 4 enemy walls, this cell robbing me of my desire to live. The courts have no care for my real story. To let them tell it, no Black man would drive away from gunshots. I've been writing a lot lately, the most important thing to me, my true freedom within these pages. I've written to my girlfriend every day, 20 new poems, and the start of a book called My Second Chance. I'm in the cell 23 hours a day since January 23rd. And today, on Valentine's Day, I finally get my first shower. I've maintained my hygiene with a bird bath in the sink. At first, I had no pen, no paper. There's no library here. I read the Bible every day and take beautiful lessons from the stories. But there's so much riding on my case. I want to prove that men can change, or else others will fall victim to this wicked system. When I get more paper, I'll copy my poems for you. I'm down to 10 pieces, using each one strategically. I send you all my love.
Wow. You're right. That is incredible writing for anyone, incarcerated or otherwise. What a blessing. Yeah, what a blessing. And that was someone that you had worked with before he was reincarcerated. Is that what you were saying?
Yes,
Wow.
I had worked with him at Patuxent. He had gone into prison at 16. He really turned his life around, became a leader, finished his GED. He ran the writing group with the instructor that I worked with. He was a volunteer in the tutoring program, tutoring other men. He composed a newsletter, and he organized 2 literary days of the arts inside the prison.
Concerning you as an individual, as a woman, not just as a poet, but someone who has these experiences that enter into your soul, into your spirit, how does it affect you? How do you look at the world? How do you see things as a result of having had these experiences with the incarcerated?
I often feel like I'm walking between 2 worlds. The world that you hear in the media and in conversation that says, these people are bad, they deserve to be in prison. I bristle when I hear the phrase, well, they're lucky, they get 3 hots and a cot. It's very personal to me now because I know people that are inside. I've joined an organization called the Justice Arts Coalition, and I'm basically a pen pal with a few men that are artists, a couple in Maryland and one in Connecticut. So it's personal when I hear about COVID in the prisons and when I hear about things like bad food in prisons. I think about the men that I've met, the people that I've worked with, and what is it that I can do about it? So one of the things that I decided was that poetry, because it taps into your heart, can often get you to change your mind with the things that you learn in poetry. So my hope in putting the book out is to spark conversation with people and then open up a door for them to become a little more educated on the issue and offer resources for them.
Well, I certainly commend you. Certainly the exposure of the works that you have created through platforms such as that by the Library of Congress and Maryland State Poet Laureate Grace Cavallari. There's a wide audience base there that has now been exposed to your work. And tell us, the book that you most recently authored, it is available through the various bookstores and online resources, or is there a specific place that persons should contact in securing that book?
The book is widely available online. It's available through, I'm going to name Bookshop first because Bookshop is an online source that pairs with local bookstores and gives some of the profits to them. So Bookshop, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and then if you buy directly from me on my website at www.annebrackenauthor.com/PayPal, I donate $5 of each sale to the Justice Arts Coalition.
Okay, so well, we certainly want our viewers to pay attention to that opportunity. Thank you so much, Anne, for that. Thank you. Now, Anne, do you see any evidence that the remorse expressed by incarcerated people has made a difference in the way that they're treated?
Unfortunately, I have not seen evidence of that. I've seen the contrary, and I have a poem that speaks about an experience I had with one of the men in the writing group.
Oh, please.
It's called Privilege. Orient yourself to the scene. One man speaking to another, separated by a vacuum of power, a trespass of privilege. The imprisoned man places his documents on the table, harnesses his courage. Maybe this time he's got enough certificates, barber school, alternatives to violence, kitchen management. Fluent in the language of subservience, he answers the parole officer's questions. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Maybe this time a respite for his accomplishments. Congratulations! You've done a lot since I last saw you. The parole officer thumbs through the file and then pushes it back across the table. Come back in 2 years.
Oh, okay. And what was the title of that poem?
Privilege.
Privilege. And that's in your book.
Yes.
Once you're inside.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Anne, thank you. Ooh, thank you for that one. Now, what did you learn about prison labor? I recall when I worked 9 to 5 in another lifetime, and there was a point at which printed materials would come to our office, and it said printed by federal, incarcerated personnel or something to that effect. And I was mortified because I had authored the documents that were now being printed by persons that were incarcerated, and never in a million years had I ever anticipated that, nor did I feel that I wanted that. But this is a reality, and that was over 10 years ago. But what do you learn about prison labor? People often say it's a good thing to keep people occupied and teaching in a trade, but you talk to us, you've been there.
You know, it's kind of a challenging needle to thread, because it does make intellectual sense to say you're occupying people, you're teaching them a trade. But the reality is, in Maryland and in many states, they pay people horribly. So 19 cents an hour is the starting rate in Maryland. And maybe after years and years and years, you move up closer to $1. In Maryland, it's called Maryland Correctional Industries. It's on Route 175 in Jessup. They make all the furniture for our public schools, our public universities and community colleges, and state office buildings. They sew the vests, the bright green and yellow vests that people wear when they're working beside the road. They paint all the street signs on the highways. They put banners on the buses and state cars for 20 cents an hour? You know, and there's no dignity in that kind of work. But the worst part to learn is kind of the way the money cycle goes. So not only are they hardly making any money, but a lot of these people are earning that money and paying some child support. They have to pay for things from the commissary because the food is so bad. They often buy food from the commissary. They have to buy personal items. So it's a revolving door of the state making money and businesses taking their money and, you know, robbing them of dignity. But the other piece, particularly at the federal level, is that you have a non-unionized workforce that cannot have any redress with their boss or anything to say about their working conditions or how long they're working. So what winds up happening is instead of offshoring, which companies did, and finding a workforce overseas, they find a workforce here.
Right. Well, I guess that leads to the question, how would you like to see our carceral system change?
I started out believing in reform, changing things, putting more programs in the prisons, changing the living environment, giving people better food. I still believe in all those things, but I really think that as a society, we need to move towards prison abolition. And when you say that, people kind of freak out because it's, they think, well, we're just going to close the doors and everybody's going to go free. That's not how anybody imagines it working. I think we have to build the structures around that idea. And one place to start, and because I was an educator, I could see how impactful this could be, would be to work in the schools and teach our very youngest children nonviolent conflict resolution, which the men learn in prison.
Right. Okay. I guess I'm looking at the clock here and I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to hear another poem before our time totally gets away. Can you give us a poem? We've got only a few minutes left. And Anne, thank you so much for spending this time with us here on Sojourn with Words. Anne Bracken.
You're very welcome. I'm going to read the title poem.
Okay.
The title poem is called Hope on Hold. Once you're inside, ignore the wreckage of time, the lined faces of men gray with age, the once angry 16-year-old, the disorganized shuffle of papers and rules and feet, the torpor of boredom thick as dreams of honey on toast. Once you're inside, every smile is suspect, every glance a risk. Even hope tucks into a corner when those doors groan closed.
Wow. Well, thank you so much again for our viewing audience, some that may have joined us later. This is Anne Bracken. She is the author of Once You're Inside, and she actually, that's her most recent book, but she also authored No Barking in the Hallways, Poems from the Classroom, and also The Altar of Innocence. And we thank you. Can you give us a quick, what's your contact info for persons that would like to reach out?
My website is www.annebrackenauthor.com, and my email is anniebluepoet@gmail.com. And I'd love to hear from people.
Thank you so much for being with us here on Sojourn with Words. And that's another episode, that's a wrap. So always remember, pick up your pen and keep writing. Thank you. Thank you, Anne.
In America, millions of families are facing hunger. Many are forced to choose between food and other necessities. I'm stuck between paying for medications or paying for food. John from Maine. After rent and power, I can get groceries. It's sad to say food comes last. Anna from Texas. The Feeding America network of food banks helps provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. I thought pantries were for less fortunate people, but anybody could be less fortunate in a day or even a second. Claire from Virginia. Now I can provide food for my family again. It's not a handout, it's a hand up. Liam from Ohio. No one should have to worry where their next meal will come from. Together, we can end hunger. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.